This is a conversation with Marijn Markus, a data scientist, drone enthusiast, and much more from the Netherlands. Marijn has gained a lot of attention on LinkedIn recently because of his coverage of Russia's war on Ukraine, among other things. Talking to him is very interesting because he's blending deep knowledge of AI and machine learning with an up-to-date view of the Ukrainian front lines. We talk about that. We also talk about many other things like Russian propaganda, drone warfare, the opposition in Russia, alcoholism, and the phenomenon of online trolls and bots. So enjoy.
I have this glowy thing. I think it's okay.
Why does it glow so much? It looks evil, it's this red, intense, evil glow.
Bro, it's got LED lights. LED lights make it go red ones go faster. That's how this stuff works.
The speed of sound was already quite fast.
No. Red goes faster. This is very simple. It's from Warhammer, so it has to be true.
What, like the Blood Angels were faster, or what was that?
No. Orcs paint things red because red ones go faster.
That's how it is. It's nice that you did Warhammer. Growing up, that was a big thing for me to allow that stuff.
Printing my own D&D stuff is actually how I got into 3D printing, and now we're using that for slightly more droney purposes. I have currently a Bamboo Labs P1S, and I'm trying to get all the China out of it while I can.
I have the Bamboo Lab P1. I have the one that didn't come with the AMS on top of it, and I've also been wondering...
AMS is the best damn part, but yeah, you can print your own parts.
I did get the AMS after, so I have it now. But I've also been wondering, how do you get rid of the China?
Well, if you turn your Wi-Fi off, it can't access anything. And the goal is to basically just have a closed loop where you can just send CD files and have them print. I'm still working on it. You can't use the fancy app and software and stuff using all that, but it's an in-progress thing that we will need sooner or later, because when this shit goes down, this is one of the first things they just turn off.
Yeah, exactly. I've been thinking so much about that. It's not even funny. But I'm hoping that somebody will have figured it out. Once we get to that point, we'll have a solution. Somebody has, like back in the days, I'm not saying I did it, but for the people who did hack, Photoshop, where, they had the keygens and the cracked versions, and you couldn't talk to the authentication servers. You turned off the internet and you rerouted the signal to like a local host response server. And not saying I did any of that. This is how we learn
these things. We Sebastian, maybe we should just start the video, but we both grew up, I think you're 30-ish something, we grew up with the young internet, and that is a blessing. No generation after us will ever have that.
No, I mean, isn't that a thing now that young people, they are really not that good with computers? They're super good with phones, or like...
You see the rise, and now it was not linear. You see technical expertise actually go down in younger age cohorts these days. Yeah, but my son is so good with the tablet and the apps, but we test the apps on monkeys. So what does that tell you?
Well, is that a thing? They test it on monkeys?
Some do. Monkey testing? No, that's a different thing. But you get what I mean.
I get what you mean. What do you think young people are better at today that we were kind of shit at growing up?
Oh, that's an easy one. We can talk about that later. Response times. Your response time as a pro gamer, we see that a lot in programmers. Your pinnacle is when you're 21, and you really start decreasing in response speeds when you're post 24, 25. So for drone piloting, you are at your best when you're 24, and then your career just goes down, which sucks for military careers where you are supposed to keep growing for decades till you're 50, 60, 70 and great. Whereas a military drone pilot career, you're done after you're 24, and we don't know how to deal with that. That means you have to start training them when they're 13, 14. Ooh, ethical question. So they can go into the battlefield once they're 18, telling the 13-year-olds you can play video games all day for the country, that they will sign up and sell their firstborn and everything. So this is going to be a mess. So yes, younger generations have some advantages, but that's fucked up too.
Did you, speaking of like schooling young generations, did you see the trailer for this new Russian documentary, Mr. Nobody Against Putin?
Like, I haven't seen the full film yet because I haven't illegally downloaded it yet, but I posted about it yesterday, actually, and
Oh, you did?
that guy
Okay.
is a hero. That guy is a hero.
Yeah, I respect that. Like he had to. Do you know the story? So he was the
Yeah.
official.
He was tasked with filming all the propaganda bullshit that state policy forced them to do, and he used that as an excuse to record everything and then flee.
Yeah, just as if somebody listens here and haven't seen the trailer, go check it out. I don't think you can even find the full documentary yet. It hasn't premiered. Maybe you can
No,
somewhere.
they're still
but
working on that. But the main thing here is because they build it with a director as well. But these stories, because this is a Russian dude who's standing up for what's right, and I shit talk Russians a lot in my writing because I write about the war, and
Yeah.
they're like the high score in terms of war crimes and stuff at an almost global level at this point. But the reason I mentioned this, I'm looking up his name right now. I need his damn name. Ah, yeah. His name is Pavel Pasha Talankin, and we have to talk about heroes like him, Russian dude teacher who records everything that's happening at his school, to let the West know.
What do you think is to stay? Okay, finish.
I shit talk a lot about Russians, but that does not mean I think all Russians are bad. I have Russian friends. I fundraise with a few who help the Ukraine military. But the reason we have to get Pavel's stories out is because he's one in a million. And his actions show the inaction of the vast masses of that country. And I'm saying that while Georgians are protesting, Syrians are fighting and winning and regained their country. Iranians are protesting. Belarusians are protesting. The Chinese have been protesting millions in the street against their own totalitarian state. And with all that context, then we point out, why aren't the Russians protesting?
Yeah.
And that too is why we need stories like Pavel's to come out.
Hold on. The Chinese were protesting. When was this? Is this now?
During COVID.
Yeah.
During COVID. And the thing, keep this in mind, China has a more totalitarian regime and state, and actually all the data collection that Moscow does not have. And yet they still stood up and resisted. I can very much respect that. And I find it so sad that we don't pay more attention to that over here in the West. We just bother when TikTok's about to get banned.
That's it. Love your cup. What is your view on the internal Russian opposition right now? What is the health of that? You said he's one in a million. Does that mean that there is no real opposition?
There is opposition, and again, I'm honored to have met a few, but most of the Russian opposition is not actually opposition, if I may, but more like a lightning rod. Everyone knows Navalny. You can Google all about it. Navalny himself was a Russian imperialist and far-right figure for years who was comparing immigrants to cockroaches and suggesting you have to take care of them with a gun. He applauded the invasion and annexation of Crimea, for example, and the invasion of Georgia. Later on, when he became a darling of the West and of Hollywood, then he started changing scope, changing his lines, and paying some lip service to, hey, maybe we shouldn't be fighting war against Ukraine. But he was never opposed to it from the start. He only switched when it became favorable. And you see this to this day because his political party and his wife continue to do talks. And today they still call for, no, we shouldn't support Ukraine. We shouldn't send arms to Ukraine because that kills Russians too. Whereas if they actually wanted to oppose Putin and overthrow Putin, then they would know that the best way to do that is by supporting Ukraine, because only a total military defeat will be able to overthrow Putin. Otherwise, he's just going to stay in power for a few decades more and stuff will remain the same. I like outliers. I'm a data scientist by trade. I talk about outliers. So I'm going to mention Garry Kasparov here, the world champion and one of my idols. I have books of him over there. Who was the first world grandmaster, chess master to be defeated by an AI, IBM's Deep Blue, somewhere in the 90s. And he made a career switch immediately after that to start writing about AI and how does that work. And now he made a career switch again to Russian oppositionist because Kasparov is Russian. And he fully supports Ukraine. He fundraises, he speaks out. And to quote him, this war will only end with the Ukrainian flag over Sevastopol, which is the big port of Crimea. Because without that, without a total defeat of the Russian military, they will just rearm and try again later. And this is a Russian dude saying it. But I love reading Kasparov's work, but his work as an oppositionist shows that most of the Russian opposition was just complaining about, oh, poor Russians, we should decrease sanctions. Somebody said mean stuff about a shark. Most of them ain't for real.
But does he live in Russia, or is he opposition from abroad?
Travels all over the place in the US and stuff. You can't stay in Russia for long and say these things.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Anyway, it's very good to have you.
That said, and then I'll shut up. Much as I dislike a whole lot of positions of Navalny, he did not deserve to rot in prison and be poisoned.
Right.
I will respect the dude for standing up, and he did not deserve to go the way he did.
Have you read the book?
Just because we disagree with somebody does not mean we should want them to end up like that.
Have you read the book, Patriot, about his life?
I tried.
You tried?
I failed.
I listened to it, and I think it reflects what you said, that he started as a very nationalist kind of guy, and there was some change throughout life, but still very problematic at the end. You know, it's not the answer that the West has been asking for. It still feels like he's a very nationalist kind of guy.
I forgot who I'm quoting now, but the real crime of the Russian opposition, who mainly the mainstream Russian opposition, is not the fact that they're just doing it for the money and for the fame and whatnot, but that they distract from the actual legitimate Russian opposition, like Kasparov and many others like him, who put or the Freedom of Russia Legion, who is fighting alongside Ukraine right now. Those are heroes who are putting their own lives on the line.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Navalny's family lives in the West, luxurious lives, and just gets a whole lot of money from fundraisers. And I just find it sad that we focus on them because they happen to be, I don't know, pretty by Western standards. But we don't focus on the guys, and again, I know one or two, who literally fight against their country to save their country. And that is also why I write, to get word out about the things that we should be focusing.
And you write a lot. That's how I came across you. I think some of your updates on LinkedIn caught my eye at some point, and I was looking forward to speaking to you. Now I see you have some swords on the wall behind you. It's a little bit more like speaking to an IS or ISIS leader than a LinkedIn guy. But how did you get into... Yeah, tell me the story of the swords, and then you can tell me how you got into data intelligence and OSINT. And, the whole thing.
Because we still have to do the introductions and stuff. So, first of all, these are not Al-Qaeda swords. I spent a few good years working with refugees here in the Netherlands, mainly from Arab nations. But no, these are not Al-Qaeda swords. These are British naval swords that I got from an old uncle. And he passed away 3 years ago-ish. And we were cleaning out the house and, hey, you want something to remember by? And I ask, how old are those swords? And they go like, oh, well over 100 years. And I'm like, I want those swords. So I remember him by having his swords on the wall. I should polish them sometime. I don't know how to use them. Don't worry.
You're quite far away from me. So, a sword.
For now.
It's not a ballistic missile. Yeah, for now.
But the story above that, the map, that world map, is actually more important to me. I'll send you a picture in a bit. That is a 16th century world map. Dutch world map, or what we knew that was Eurasia and such. If you look at the Australia part, it's literally not finished because they had no clue there's emus or something on that side in the 17th.
Yeah,
but I like this because some things are the same and some things are very much different. I got this from an old friend because Russia is not on this map.
What are they labeling that big landmass?
Moscow.
Oh.
Muscovy. It was the city of Moscow, the colonial empire of Moscow. the name Russia, Россия, they actually took from the Rus, from the old Ukrainians, and then started cosplaying and LARPing as actually that was us all along. But this map of just a few hundred years ago shows Russia didn't exist, but Kiev is in there, Lviv is in there, Cherkasy is in there. It's crazy how detailed that was, because Ukraine as a nation is well over 1,000 years old. Just, nations change names, just like we change hair, those. So I like that map as a data scientist because it shows how much of our perspective is based on what we know at that point in time and what we don't know at that point in time, and how much those things can change. And we think things change are the same all the time, but no, change is the only constant. And the worst thing we can do is say things should be because they have always been that way. Because just a few hundred years, this world looked a whole lot different, and what we considered normal was a whole lot different. Then again, what we considered normal back then included a whole lot of imperialism, colonialism, and slave labor. So please, let's not go back to that.
Let's know. Have you played those paradox games like Europa Universalis and I don't know the names.
I know them, but I was always more of a Red Alert guy. Sorry.
More RTS. No, but if you play those games, just how quickly territories grew, shrunk, changed hands. History has been like a biological creature that's just changed all the time. And I know.
I'm Dutch. We have southern neighbors called Belgians. And occasionally, like jokingly, I like to point out that they basically speak Dutch. Half of them do. And they're basically Dutch with a funny accent. And 200 years ago, they were part of the Netherlands. They've only been independent for about 200 years, less. But depending on the part of my country I'm in, people either start laughing when I suggest we should invade, or they start clapping. And I get nervous when they start clapping.
Yeah. I assume it's a very small invasion movement going on in Netherlands now.
Oh, no, it would be easy. They literally do not have air defenses. The Belgian military does not have anti-air missile systems and just relies on their neighbors, which is a very bad long-term strategy. But we're friends and they have better beer and chocolate than us.
Nice.
But they speak the same language as us, so we should go in and blah, blah. I have to make comparisons like this because every week I have people commenting on my writing like, yeah, but Russian and Ukrainian, isn't that basically the same language, so the same people, so it's okay to invade and enslave the other? And I have to point out that German and Dutch and Portuguese and Spanish are linguistically, statistically more similar than Ukrainian and Russian. Ukraine actually resembles Polish far more from the statistical point of view. But, you don't see Spain invade Portugal these days. Good thing they don't.
I'm happy about that. I don't need any more war here. But there are a lot of old fortresses, on the border. So you can see history. It's played out in the past, right? And this is where the lines ended. And now there's just no beef anymore. It's just some friendly bickering.
Friendly bickering and jokes is how we should keep it.
Yeah.
Like, I live in Rotterdam here. Our city got bombed to hell and back by the Germans 80 years ago. But because of that, we have really big roads and the highest concentration of modern architecture in Europe and great public transport as a result, and the only actual skyline in the country. And now we can joke about it slowly, very slowly. But the point is that we should learn history. We should know history to learn from it and do better. We shouldn't use history as an excuse to repeat it.
Do you have, this is not really something I was planning to talk to you about, but in Germany right now, they have AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, rising, the far-right party. The elections are coming, and speaking of learning from history, is there something similar in the Netherlands now? Like some kind of far-right movement?
We're actually a few steps ahead of that. So in Germany, the AfD, you have the far-right party coming up, basically all of more impoverished Eastern Germany votes for them. Multiple of their party members have been accused in court for being fascist. Very, very simple. The things they're proposing in terms of get rid of all the migrants, blah, blah. and they stand to gain quite a lot of votes. Here in the Netherlands, we've had elections last year that also got, you might know Geert Wilders, blonde guy, also very
Yeah, I remember
anti-Islam,
now.
anti-migrant guy, actually voted into power, but we have a parliamentary democracy here, or whatever you call it, meaning we don't have one party who rules, we have a consensus between multiple parties who rules, because we all hate each other and no party is big enough to rule by themselves, which is good, because yes, he became the biggest party, but he still has to work with 2-3 other parties who say, no, that shit's Nazi, we're not doing that. And that somewhat tempers what he does. And what he does is mainly over the last year do nothing because they can't get anything done. We're going to see a lot of that in Germany and across the Atlantic as well over the coming years, where they will scream very loudly, everyone then to do a thing, then everyone will tell them that's a really stupid idea. And then they don't do it and continue to talk about the next thing, because every failing empire tends to do this. We can't improve the situation at home.
Yeah.
You start shit abroad. You invade another nation. Putin is literally doing it to distract the people from his own collapsing country in terms of birth rate and emigration. And the highest HIV rates in the modern world. And in the same way, Trump promised to improve the pricing of eggs. As soon as he rises to power, he suggests to invade Canada and Greenland. Here we go. You looked up the Dutch votes. Yeah, PVV at the top is our far-right party, but nobody really wants to work with them, which is why they can't seize power, luckily.
Why do you think people vote for them? And is there a risk that if they don't get stuff done together with the other parties, people will just want to give them more power?
The failed Austrian painter, from 80, 90-ish years ago, he never reached the majority either. He got
That's true.
30-something-ish percent. Also had a coalition government. But while the rest of the other parties, other coalitions could assign ministers or whatever, he assigned chief of staff and chief of intelligence services, which he could then use to accuse all the other parties of being traitors to the state and then assume power. So we should actually be aware handing people particular kinds of power that allows them to get rid of other people in power. Like, the new head of the U.S. intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who is a friend of Putin and Assad, by which I mean you don't need to have a majority to seize power. We have literally seen this happen before 80 years ago, and we should be worried about that. And I'm happy that at least a part of my country does not think this is okay. Now, in response to your original question, why the heck is this happening? People are unhappy. Economy is not doing great. People are losing jobs. There's a perception of everything bad being caused by other groups or minorities or whatever, and you start blaming them. This is age-old. You blame minorities. There you go. But the real joke is, of course, both here in the Netherlands and over there in Germany, is that Geert Wilders here and the AFD over there are big fans, big enemies of Muslim immigration, because migrant immigration, blah, blah, and EU causes all the bad things. But they're friends of Putin and Russia.
Why does that always walk hand in?
Who causes this migration? Because the biggest crisis we've had in Europe is the Syrian refugee crisis. And I was studying this stuff back then. We had 1 million people cross the border, and the EU almost broke because we didn't know what to do with them. We don't even talk about the 11 million displaced people who stayed out of Europe. But we also forget that the Syrian refugee crisis was caused by Putin handing Assad all the bombs and jets he needed to murder 500,000 of his own people, meaning this was a created crisis. And the same people who are against immigration applaud those who cause the biggest migrant crises in Europe, because that gives them a platform to be elected on. So here in Europe, we have a lot of unhappy people, and then one guy who says he has all the solutions, and it's those people with the funny voices or noses. And there you go. History is a flat circle.
What? Why do you think there's always a correlation between the parties that hate or say they hate immigration and Russia? Is it, as you said, it's a platform for them in some way? But why does it always end up like that? Because I can sympathize with people voting for a party that wants to reduce immigration, fine, if that's the way you want to go. But it seems to always go so far, and for some reason it hooks into Russia.
No, in this case, we were going back to old Soviet styles of propaganda tactics. If you want to destabilize a country, you fund the opposition, and that's both the far left and the far right opposition. It used to be way more communist. Nowadays, it is far more fascist, but it's basically horseshoe theory. You see this in Germany, where the far left people are also, for some godforsaken reason, pro Russia. In America, where the far left Jill Stein and such dines with Putin. And over here in the Netherlands, where the far left SP, a lot of them still have those Mao watches from China and stuff. But the whole point is, if you want to screw with the power base and political stability of a country, you hand cash and weapons or whatever to whatever opposition is there, and you don't care what color or what ideology you have, because this is not about ideology. This is about the absence of ideology, really.
So which countries do you think are suffering the most from Russian influence right now in terms of political?
We have this thing called Eastern Europe, who is very, very well aware of what it's like to live under Russian occupation, colonization, and such, because they did that for decades. But right now we have the people of Georgia, who are barely in the news anymore, who are fighting for their independence. People forget that 20% of Georgia has been occupied by Russia since 2008. And their current government, the Georgian Dream government, is actually ran in part by Russian money. And you have people protesting for 50-something days now in the streets of Tbilisi on a day-to-day basis against their government that is basically enacting anti-democratic laws, outlawing opposition and replacing them with more suitable opposition, enacting laws like the Foreign Agents Law, which is copy-pasted from Russia itself, where it basically says anyone who takes money from abroad can be labeled an enemy of the state, which means any democratic movement supported by the West just gets annihilated over there. But for some reason, the party that gets most of its money from Russia is exempted from this. And so we have Georgia, we have Chechnya, is actually a very important country here. Chechnya, a Muslim country, was its own republic de facto in the 90s after the fall of the Soviet Union. Then Putin wanted to become popular. So he set up the Moscow bombings, 1999. You can Google this, because he was a nobody back then, and nobody knew Putin. And they blew up apartments in Moscow and blamed the Muslims, because that's what you do, blamed the Chechens of Chechnya as an excuse to start the Second Chechen War and invade. I believe it was 4 apartments were blown up back then during the Moscow bombings. A 5th bomb never went off and was found by civilians when they saw the FSB agents, modern KGB, clean it. And they quickly said, oh, yeah, this was an exercise. This was totally an exercise. Thank you for finding, because they were cleaning a bomb that didn't explode. And everyone who ever researched that died over the next 2 years. So that was a setup just to start a war. Then they bombed Grozny, a city of 1 million people, into the ground, and occupied Chechnya and made that a part of Russia again. This is how Putin became popular as a war hero and then rose to presidency. So he literally came into power by murdering his own people. And now we have to conclude 30 years later, he will continue, 25 years later, he will continue to murder to stay in power. Because the kids of the Chechens then, 25 years later, are now mobilized and sent to go invade Ukraine on the side of Russia. And the next generation of Ukrainians, if, God help us, Ukraine were to lose, the next generation would be indoctrinated, mobilized, and sent to invade the Baltics or Poland. And I would rather not see more war happen in Europe, and that's why we have to stop this today, now, while we can.
That makes sense. And you think that the only way to really stop it is military, right? Military aid to Ukraine. Or what solutions do you see?
I think I wrote about that today, actually, because the Russian military is currently running out of steam. But they're gaining ground. We can see that their land gains have been decreasing since December. They're using donkeys and camels at the front lines now. What Putin desperately needs is a break, a pause to rearm, regroup, and retry again later, because his economy is overheating and on fire in case of the refineries. He's running out of people, he's running out of tanks, running out of artillery. He's relying on North Korean imports for artillery. That's saying something. So he wants a pause. And what do we see? What would really help him? Negotiations, ceasefire, elections, which cause a lot of chaos. Anything to get a pause to try again later. Which is why he must not get that pause. Because a regrouping will mean more war later. Simple as that. And the only way, quoting Kasparov again, only way to stop this from happening again is total Russian defeat. The virus of imperialism, Garry Kasparov, again, Russian oppositionist, calls it. Because the virus of imperialism won't stop and won't die unless there is a total military defeat. And that's the best hope for a better future for Russians, too. Otherwise, they're going to be stuck in cycles of temporary peace, then invading somebody again, then temporary peace, then invading somebody again for decades to come.
Do you think there is a temptation from Trump and Kellogg, who's his representative in Ukraine right now, to accept a slowdown from Russia's side as a sign of a Trump victory, that they were able to kind of diffuse the war?
Yes, and that would be a very bad thing, because we're seeing an Afghanistan 2.0 case here, where he just wants to make a deal to brag about without actually solving anything in the long term. In the same way, Trump, during his first time in office, negotiated the U.S. retreat of Afghanistan, which was a disaster. But he negotiated that during his term so he could have a win, and then Biden was the one who actually had to enact it, and it was an actual disaster, because what had they done? Release tons of Al-Qaeda leaders and not even involve the Afghanistan government during those negotiations. So giving that context and that data and experience of the past, I'm very fearful that they'll just try to find something to make them look good and then get the heck out, because Trump promised to solve this war on day one of his presidency, but also before his presidency started and within weeks, and actually none of that has happened. So he just wants something that makes him look good. And a lot of people are positive about this, which is like opium and copium in my opinion, because yes, the dude is unpredictable, and maybe he'll flood Ukraine with weapons. I would like that, and then they'll just win and defeat Russia the old-fashioned way, because he's an opportunist and he might pick your side. But the issue of making deals with opportunists is that they will dump you the moment it's no longer opportune for them. That's making deals with the devil right there. And what we see right now, today, he was saying, we gave 300 billion to Ukraine. And that's why we want 500 billion in minerals and rare earth metals. Even though Kellogg, his right-hand man for Ukraine, just days ago said that's a myth. We didn't give hundreds of billions to Ukraine. We gave 50 billion, not 5,000, not 300, whatever, 50 billion. And half of that was just an investment into the U.S. military industry to produce new ammunition and missiles, because we gave the own missiles to Ukraine, which was the Biden administration's way of bragging, really, by counting twice, because they spent money on Ukraine and they spent money on replacing the stuff they gave to Ukraine, and then they called it all aid. But if his right-hand man is saying 50 billion and he himself is saying 300 billion at the same time, then I do not have a lot of faith that they're acting in good faith here.
I think I saw the number 150 billion, and that like 65 were actually given, and that the majority of that was in the US.
Yeah. to the U.S. military industry because they handed their old ATACMS from the 90s to Ukraine and then built new ones, which is a great investment. And yeah, go for it. Happy investment. But that's not aid, man. That's just replenishing your stocks and calling it aid. And the Biden administration did that, and I'm not complaining because happy that they supported, blah, blah. But story is then twisted by the new administration as well.
Yeah, I think the inconsistency is very worrying. Like, partly they said they would end the war, and then it's just taking a while, and now they seem to just be buying time. I think today was announced by Kellogg that he's looking into options. He's talking to NATO partners to kind of get their perspective on things. So it's going to take a while. But also the inconsistency communication with the numbers. Like, they're using it one day to just really be aggressive and push demands, and another day they're sharing the truth to balance for whatever agenda they have.
One day they'll say the right thing, the next day they'll say the wrong thing. And that is the main point, that you cannot rely on what they'll say tomorrow. And that just damages the US in the long term, makes them an unreliable partner on the world stage. And yeah, you don't collaborate with people because they happen to favor you in the moment. You have an alliance because the alliance shouldn't persist as long as the situation remains the same. The whole point of friendship and relationships and alliances is that you stay the same regardless of the circumstances changing. And we see that a whole lot now, but things change. So let's renegotiate everything, and we want all your minerals in exchange for aid. That just means nobody's ever going to make deals with you anymore because you won't stick to them.
Speaking of the contributions from the US to Ukraine, who are the main contributors? Can we pull up some list or something?
Yeah, Kiel Institute has some good trackers for that. KEL, yeah, there you go. So it really depends. This is one of those lying with statistics things. This is about aid committed. So not aid delivered, and it only goes to August 2024. And the vast majority of what the US sends is military aid, whereas the EU sends much more financial aid because the US has much more military stuff to give.
Yeah. Yeah, because apparently, like, only a part of this dark green was actually given from the US. Okay, so that means that EU institutions in general, whatever that means, I'm not sure what that means, have given more.
Yeah, so if you grab Kiel Institute data, I'm trying to pull that up over here. We find that the EU altogether actually delivered twice as much as the US by now. Yet for some reason, we still have orange guys screaming, "Oh yeah, the US, we gave so much, we gave more, they should give more," which is just factually untrue in terms of already donated. But people don't care about facts these days, only about how you make them feel.
Well, I cannot share the...
Kiel Institute is down. Shame.
Is it down for you as well?
Yeah, I'm seeing it here too. That's bad.
DDoS? Is somebody attacking them? There's a lot of that stuff now. Cybersecurity is more important than ever.
It is, but most organizations turned their cybersecurity departments into Excel checklists about, do we have all the flyers and all the certificates in case it goes wrong, rather than people who actually know how to prevent it from going wrong, which is a shame.
This is, by the way, I think one of the strengths of Ukraine today, isn't it? That Ukraine has gained so much actual practical knowledge in, first, how to defend the country, 2, defense tech, and 3, cybersecurity. I think these are 3. Are there any other areas, or what do you think?
Ukraine is going to be a global exporter of knowledge on drone tech and modern combat experience that just nobody in the West has. Also, take into account that they produce a lot of their own ammunition these days, which they couldn't 2 years before. So they're also going to be, they already de facto are, the biggest producer of military stuff in all of Europe.
Right.
I was talking a few weeks ago with the defense dudes, and here in the Netherlands, we have a big thing that we're going to create a drone battalion. Yay, a drone battalion. Great. And I basically call bullshit on creating a drone battalion, because your point is not to have a unit specifically for drones in modern warfare. The point is to have drones in every unit, in the scouting units, in the artillery spotting units, in the tank. You will have the gunner, the gunner, the driver, the ammo dude, and a drone dude who is controlling the drone overhead that literally sees more than the gunner and the commander do. It's a huge game changer that we see in Ukraine today. Drone-on-drone warfare being used to drop supplies, to take down high-flying enemy scout drones, to lay mines at night. Everything is incorporating modern technology, and that stuff's changing on a monthly basis. I'm in touch with the Wild Hornets. If you know of them, Google the Wild Hornets, plug, please donate, which applies drones to the front line in Ukraine. And they get requests from different units for, hey, can you get us this and this type of drone with that type of fin? And can you 3D print the fins to be 2 centimeters shorter? Okay, so they get that feedback that the fins on the drones have to be slightly shorter. They adjust in Blender the 3D model, send it to like 20 printers in a basement in Kiev, because that's where some dudes are printing it. And within an hour, they have adjusted their production line of drones for the front line.
That's amazing.
Any Western industry over here, they can't even fathom what that's like to adjust your production line within the hour. You and I, we were just talking about 3D printers. It's like that too, just with a generator in case the power goes down. And all of this knowledge, from piloting to integrating it into systems to production as we speak on the fly, and all of the feedback they get, because every battalion is using their own different drones with different supply lines, which is logistic hell. But
It
also
sounds
means
like
they
it.
innovate and improve and test in production so much faster than the top-down Russian models, where it's like, you get this kind of drone, good luck. Means they have all that knowledge and expertise, and holy hell, they're gonna be world leaders post-war in this. So I would like to have Ukraine on our side post-war, because I was in Berlin last summer at the Ukraine Recovery Conference, and I was standing in a huge line in the open, security checks, and I'd just look up and ask, "You think we're safe here?" And guy next to me looks up and goes like, "No, it's not safe. Because you could fly a $200 drone in there. Heck, I could probably build one. I'm not gonna. But give me $200 and a grenade, and technically, theoretically, any kid with an internet connection could learn how to build improvised weapons of terrorism." Actually, we saw this today. We literally saw this today. Russian criminals in Russia are taking down their business. I'll send you a link. Russian criminals in Russia itself are taking down their rivals with drones now. Organized crime in Russia is using drones to blow each other up. It's only a matter of time before they start doing that here too.
They're doing that in my... no, they're not doing that in my hometown, Stockholm. But they're still using grenades.
But they will.
Yeah.
It's only a matter of time. The technology is there, and insurgents worldwide are taking notes. Let's not forget, drones were already used in limited numbers in the Syrian civil war, which lasted over a decade. And it's in part because of that then they began scaling it to crazy levels in Ukraine.
But so your point is basically that Ukraine needs NATO, perhaps, but NATO needs Ukraine possibly even more.
We need Ukraine more down the line. This is not just about NATO. This is also about the EU. We hit, what was it? 10,000 or 100,000 tanks blown up. I think it was 100.
100,000 tank vehicles, maybe?
Yeah. So it was reported that 10,000, that Ukraine took down 10,000 Russian tanks. And we can argue about these numbers, whether or not it's true. Sure. Or the exactly right, or just demolished or retrieved. But 10,000 tanks, that's more tanks than Europe has, without America, who is now turning into an unreliable partner because the American century is basically ending. Without America, Europe does not have that big a military.
Can't you make
not have that big a military.
Can't you make the argument that the military that Europe does have is more advanced?
Yes, and would run out of ammo in a few days in a full-scale war. And
so
those are the types of things that we now see happening at scale, because we are not prepared for a full-scale war. In the same way, drone unit, no, you need drones in every unit. If we run numbers, we will be able to fight and blow up tons of Russians in the first few weeks, months. And then we run out of ammunition and we can't make more because Germany stopped building Taurus missiles years ago. France and the UK are debating building more Storm Shadows, but they haven't, and they can't spin up and scale up that production within weeks. So we have this thing where we would absolutely lay to waste the Russian invaders at the start, and then we would start running out of everything.
I also read that the soldiers that were trained in the West, that when they actually come to the battlefields in Ukraine, it's problematic. They don't have the training adapted to the reality. I mean, you're following the news every day. Do you think this is a problem right now?
Yes, it is. We've been doing this stuff, and with no disrespect to the Western military people who do their best, but we are out of practice. Besides insurgency fights in Afghanistan and such, we have no experience with full-on wars against other modern militaries. Yeah. And the only way we're going to get those is actually from Ukraine. So yes, we train people here in the West and Patriots and Leopard 2s and everything, and that's really good. But in terms of practical knowledge, we saw that with some of the feedback from people being trained for modern Western tanks. In terms of practical knowledge and experience, the Ukrainian soldiers being trained know more than the actual Western trainers. We have a huge gap in knowledge, and we can either make use of this occasion to learn it, or we will waste it. And that's going to cost more of our lives in the future too.
So then how do you navigate the issue with NATO's budget spend? Because I know that there's a big call for increasing spend across Western countries. Some are even talking about raising the bar to 5%, right? But most of us are barely at 2%. How can you justify spending more if we are so out of touch with the reality of war?
First of all, let me point out that this is an apples and pears problem. You can Google this because NATO spending is calculated differently between countries. The US has gigantic NATO spending because they do not have national health care and count all health care spent on veterans as part of their NATO spending, whereas in pretty much every EU country, healthcare spending is separate from military budgets, which is one reason why U.S. NATO spending and military spending is so overblown. Another one is that they just blow a whole lot of money on military, let's be honest. But it is an apples and pears case. Now, having said that, your original question, why important? Because it's better to fight a war there than to wait for it to come here, which is something my country, the Netherlands, learned the hard way 80 years ago, but apparently we forgot. Yeah. But that doesn't mean it's not true.
But can you spend more money and know that it's being used in a practical way? Like, it seems like we don't even know how to spend the money we already have.
That is another topic, and we see that here in the Netherlands, for example, in that we had budget cuts on our military for the last 20, 30 years, in part by Mark Rutte, who now heads NATO, which is funny. But you can't fix systematic budget cuts and knowledge and experience and people leaving your organization by meeting a 2% for 1 or 2 years. That does not fix systematic misinvestment and underinvestment. So it's going to take years, if not decades, and even more spending than we're currently at to rebuild that capacity that we let go to waste post a fall of the wall. So I'm not telling you it's bad. I'm telling you it's worse, as usual, in that we will need to spend even more to just rebuild, because this is not about staying up to snuff. It's about getting back there. I joke about Belgium not having anti-air. Well, okay, we have some anti-air, but we would run out, likely, of hellishly expensive anti-air missiles when Russia starts flying in bootleg cruise missiles full of Chinese parts that cost less to produce, and they can produce more because they have the production lines now, while we will say we're perfectly safe with our euros per missile. No, our missiles will be more expensive than the ones they fire at us. Intercepting them will be more expensive. Ukraine already encountered this problem with their Patriots that they got. They now save that mainly for like hypersonics and stuff. Because if your defense systems are more expensive per shot than their attack systems, then you're going to run out of money before them. And this is a very big long-term problem. And I mentioned this before. If Russia ever gets crazy enough to invade, Moldova was actually their first plan. We have leaked plans showing that they wanted to go into Moldova after Ukraine because they already occupied Transnistria. But they failed because they were stopped at Kherson, and Ukraine is the reason that the rest of Europe is safe. But after that, they would probably have attacked the Baltics or Poland. So NATO war. And in a full-on NATO war, they would get slapped unless the US doesn't participate, which is now a more and more realistic situation because they'd be, I don't know, conquering Canada or something. And then it's just against EU nations who will again slap them for the first few weeks and months and then run out of ammunition. And then it's like, gee, we can't produce anymore because we dismantled those industries years ago. What do you mean they can produce more cruise missiles than we can produce anti-air missiles to take them down? And then we enter a battle of logistics, because both Sun Tzu and Napoleon pointed out, Napoleon said, amateurs discuss strategy, professionals discuss logistics. We've been talking about strategy. The real danger is logistics, and the real danger here is that in long-term logistics, Russia, especially with the backing of China, could outproduce us, and then we start dying.
How do we counter that? Is there any way to counter that? Because Europeans are buying shit from Timo, all day long. There's so much production, so many factories in China, and we know production is also cheap in Russia. Like, is there a way to counter that?
Well, we already see that happening because China is going the way of Japan. Japan was the second economy of the world back in the 70s, 80s, and economic miracle and such, until they weren't, because they were cheap. Great for production, then got more expensive as living standards improved, so everyone moved to China instead. Now, because of this danger, we see tons of companies diversify and move to Taiwan for one, but Vietnam, India, Indonesia, because they don't want to be dependent on a single nation for the entire production line. Simultaneously, we see existing production lines, Apple, everything Elon Musk has in China, double down on maintaining the monopoly and the power of China to keep everyone from leaving. A long-term strategy for us would be to diversify and be less dependent on the single nation for this. They're going to try to keep it as attractive as possible to stay that way. And side note being that the current drone wars are fought with Chinese parts on both sides, which is also a big problem because some of those drones can be tracked. And I have had very panicky phone calls at the start of the full-scale invasion when we were talking with people who source drones, DJI drones. We know that the Russians have aerodrovnika software, how do you call it, that allows them to not only see DJI drones in an area, but see where their control signals are coming from. So you get on a map where the enemy controller is, and that's where you point your artillery. You can bypass this by downgrading the firmware on the drone or flashing it or getting a different type of software on there so they can no longer track it. But it really depends on what version of the DJI drone you buy, and back then it was much more buying than assembling, whether or not you can downgrade it and whether or not it can become untrackable. And then you have this girl whose father was fighting at the front line saying, I'm going to send him this drone. And me and another dude basically screaming, no, don't send him the drone. Send picture of the box so we can see the serial number and see when it was made, which type of firmware it has, and whether or not it can be tracked or not. Because otherwise you're sending your dad a bomb. But her mind is just, I have to get drone there, otherwise dad dies. End of the day, a friend of mine had another drone that had the right firmware already in a shed, so we sent that one instead. But man,
You got to be careful.
logistics
Yeah. But
win wars.
the
But
problem is
logistics
that
could cost lives too.
like other countries that are common outsourcing destinations for production, like Vietnam, are close allies of China. Like Vietnam and China are buddies. And I got an ad in my Instagram flow yesterday of some backpack producer. It's a European company. And he explained in a video, like, this is what we can, I would love to produce our backpacks in Europe, but it's not possible. It's not because of production costs. It's not only that. You think it's that, but it's like we cannot get the materials. If we wanted to make a backpack with one material or two, textile and maybe some foam, that would be easy. But if there's like 5 or 10 or 20 different materials in this one, and the only place we can get all of that, to one location in a practical manner, it's Asia, it's Vietnam. So that's why we're producing it in Vietnam.
It's like this thing called buying out the competition, or at least become friends with the competition. I've worked a lot in India. Been there for a month. I love the food. I'm just not made for it. But in India, I really also learned the importance of logistics. We're doing a project for farmers back there because India relies on British railways. Have you ever tried British railways?
When I lived in the UK, if that's the same thing, they're not very reliable anyway.
You wouldn't wish that upon your worst enemy. And basically, they built the same stuff in large parts of India, which is actually a challenge for India, who as a country is very much developing, very much growing and stuff, but mainly in the IT sector, because for production and industry, you need proper logistics, which is usually access to a lot of water, access to a lot of rivers and or really good trains. They do not have that much in way of access to rivers, and their trains were built by the British, which is a challenge for the country to become an industry power, as they are already an IT power, for which you just need electricity and a phone line.
Yeah, that's tricky. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the Russian economy and your views on it right now. How is Russia doing?
Man, I did not prepare for all of your questions. Okay, so Russia fully switched to a war economy, which poses a huge threat to us because they can keep on producing stuff that we cannot. Yeah. Simultaneously, they're burning all their bridges. Nobody can borrow money anymore. Sanctions hit hard in the long term. We still need more. But they can bypass a lot of them with their feudal overlord China, because Russia is rapidly becoming a vassal state of China. And as long as China continues to back Russia, the war will continue. The moment Xi Jinping says stop, they will stop because they're borrowing tons of money and equipment, getting equipment from China. So China, who has huge economy, is keeping Russia alive, because simultaneously they're inside Russia itself. There's huge labor shortages. 1 million people left the country shortly after the war. This summer they will likely have lost 1 million people in the war, so dead and injured. People, dudes without arms and legs, you can't really bring those back into the economy. Meaning they are now wasting their able-bodied male working age population on a war to get more land and get more working age population, because demographically the country was already going down, had some of the highest rates of mortality rates. People are drinking and violencing themselves to death. High single parenthood, highest divorce rates in the known world, and yet for some reason they think Russia is a Christian nation, even though it's also by just one of the biggest Muslim countries in the world when you think about it. So, but people call it a Christian nation. It is not by Christian conservative standards. Ukraine actually is. They go to church a whole lot more demographically. But the main point here is demographically, Russia is going down. Their economy will not last when they have not enough men who can actually work, and they do not have the birth rates to even sustain a population. And, as all crumbling empires do, you start invading another nation, which is why they're invading Ukraine, who has a younger and more wealthy and more healthy population that they would love to I don't know, indoctrinate and mobilize and use to invade the next country in 20 years later, because that is literally how colonial empires operate. You enslave one people, then use them to invade the next. That was their saving grace. And we must ensure that they do not get access to it. Plus all the raw earth materials, but that's another topic.
Well, but what I'm hearing from you is that they're not doing great. And I'm reading, I think the past few weeks, the tone has changed. Maybe it's the past month. People didn't talk about it a lot, but now I'm seeing more and more articles in the vein of the Russian economy is cracking, don't give up now. It's kind of starting. And I think the intensity of assaults from the Russian side has really gone down in the past weeks. Correct me if I'm wrong.
In the document, I actually posted pictures about that. If you can show them, I'm not sure if you pull that one up. The land gains are ending. The Russian oil industry is on fire, which is literally the lifeblood of the Moscow regime. Which is interesting because hits on Russian oil refineries with Ukrainian drones really picked up. Yeah, scroll by it. If you look here, that's the Institute for the Study of War. That's just the current situation. And for context, current situation is Russia lost half the land they occupied early 22. And it has mainly been a stalemate at the front line ever since. We're gaining villages, but not gaining entire oblasts. The only noteworthy exception here was summer of 24 when Ukraine occupied a part of Kursk. And Western tanks literally rolled into Russia and nothing happened. There was no nuclear war, which is funny. But if you go down one picture... Here, this is data from Deep State, who track numbers of assaults and attacks by Russia and land gains on a daily basis. So they track square kilometers that Ukraine loses to Russia. And in this graph, we can see that those gains are ending. Russia started a big offensive over summer, and we're gaining kilometers in the east. But now that attack is drying up. And this was part of Ukraine's strategy all along, to slowly back up while Russia sends thousands of their men into the blender to occupy a farm. And let Russia overheat and overexert itself. Because now we see very clearly here that their land gains are ending and they can no longer muster the people and the logistics to attack. They're running out of ammunition. They're running out of trucks. They're using, again, donkeys and camels at the front lines because they don't have enough Ladas. And you see this in the next picture, which is also from Deep State as well. In the last 2 months of the Biden administration, there was a surge of Western, mainly U.S., ammunition and gear that had been held back for basically most of the war up till now. We are now seeing what happens when Ukraine is properly supplied with ammunition and weapons, and it does not look pretty for Moscow.
Can I ask, why do you think it was held back for such a long time?
Because the Biden administration pursued a tactic of de-escalation, and they didn't want Ukraine to stop existing, but they also didn't want Ukraine to win too hard, because then Putin will make vague nuclear threats again, and they get nervous over vague nuclear threats. Doesn't matter that Russia's missiles and nuclear delivery systems literally do not seem to work and were shot out of the sky using Patriots, which is a system from the 70s and 80s, mind you. They were all for de-escalation and probably made some shady dealings with Moscow behind doors. But now we're seeing what happens when the West stops holding back. And that remains the important point. The moment we stop holding back and give Ukraine everything it needs to win, Ukraine will win. Ukraine could have already won, and this god-awful war could have been over years ago if we stopped holding back. But for some reason, when a dog bites you, you hit it back so it stops attacking. But when Russia starts the biggest war in Europe since World War II, we don't say hit him back, stop him from fighting, because otherwise other dictators get ideas. We say, oh, we need to de-escalate. And Germany sends helmets at first. They still haven't sent Taurus. which is a waste. Oh yeah, you hear this more to the point, because every month or so, every week, you get trolls screaming, "Oh, they gained ground, blah blah." But here in data, you can clearly see that Russia has not gained much ground over the last literal years. They were almost at Kiev. I have been in those streets where the tanks rode, and then they failed. And now they're just trying to hold on to 18% of Ukraine, because that's all they occupy, 18%.
These trolls that say these things, who do you think they are? Like, because you attract a lot of attention from a lot of different people. Are there a lot of trolls, and who are they?
Oh, if you go to the literal next picture, you'll see me talking about my bots and my trolls.
Yeah.
I love them on the big stage. Boris, if you're listening, you mother fluffer. So I have a large fan following on LinkedIn of people who dutifully comment on all my posts and call me a liar, a propagandist, a Nazi, everything, on a daily basis. Some of them pretend to be Dutch, but they only post after midnight and mainly write about Trump and whatever, and shit post on me. Some of them, you can see it in the bottom left over there. That Texas dude talks about warm water ports. He's clearly not Texan, because only Russians talk about warm water ports. But they fail to see that LinkedIn is a comments-driven algorithm. So every time they shit on me, I trend harder, because LinkedIn only sees, wow, this dude is popular because, he's getting a lot of replies from people. So I tolerate my trolls because they literally help me trend harder. And I'm pretty sure some of them are being paid in rubles. And that's just the biggest compliment you can get, right? That people are paid rubles to shit on you. That means you're doing something right. Oh, yeah. And this is Shay, who, as you can see, mass posts and comments on my everything every now and then. He also claims to be Dutch or whatever, but tends to post after midnight by Dutch hours, which is not suspicious at all.
But do you know how they structure these efforts? Or is it just, you think some of them might be paid? Or like, are they based in Russia? Are they low-paid
If you go with
workers?
IP addresses and such, many of them are. We have a lot of Serbians. Gotta love the Serbs, because that's easy to get VPNs and such. Some of them might honestly be people misinformed, people with opinions. This is a free country; you can have opinions. But the systematics and the patterns of the same people year after year following you and commenting on you, usually with the same arguments that's always being pushed at the same time, leads one to believe that yes, these are organized efforts. We've seen evidence of Russian interference in American and European elections or over the past decade, literal decade. We had Brexit. We had the Trump 2016 elections. We had it here in the Netherlands. If you literally go to the next picture, you will see another example of that, and one of my favorites. Did you know that all online information, or practically all online information about Nazis in Ukraine, did not exist before 2014 and spontaneously came into existence after Russia invaded Crimea and started shit in the Donbass? I was a data science student back then, and this fascinated me because I read books about Russian propaganda, Soviet propaganda methods, like firehose of falsehoods, where you just you don't come up with a convincing lie, which is what Chinese propaganda does, but you just tell 1,000 lies to drown the truth.
You see what sticks.
Yeah, exactly. And I was reading a book on that. And then I looked at the TV, and MH17 got shot down. And Ukraine said Russia did it. And Russia said that Ukraine did it. And the CIA did it. And the Illuminati, and probably the Jews. And the NSA. And God knows who else. Maybe the dinosaurs. And I'm reading that book, and I'm looking at TV at that point in time. And I'm Dutch. We lost almost 200 people that day when MH17 got shot down. And then I realized This stuff's still happening today. It's like studying dinosaurs and then you see one walking outside. And the same goes for this picture, where I started approaching propaganda from a quantitative perspective, which back then we called statistics and it was not sexy at all. Now we call it data science and AI, and now I'm sexy as heck.
It's very sexy,
but
yeah.
This is just one of my favorite, thank you, one of my favorite pictures to showcase how much content that people to this day repeat, because this is a meme. People believe this because it's been repeated so often. Because Goebbels himself said, repeat a lie often enough that people believe it's truth. This was an info op. People were paid. It worked. It worked. We had governments all over Europe for years saying, no, we shouldn't send weapons or aid to Ukraine, and we shouldn't let them join the EU because I read online that they're Nazis. Meanwhile, who's the country that's invading others, deporting children and putting them into camps, committing mass torture and genocide in Europe? That's Russia, not Ukraine.
But why doesn't it work to just show the statistical reality for a thing like this?
Because most people do not understand statistics, first of all, and I can drop the mic at that point.
But you could show a line. You could show a 1 point that is the number of Nazis in Ukraine, the number of Nazis in Russia, and this would be out of the window, right? This would be a moot argument.
I can make this very simple. Every country has a few, but some are like enlarged massively, and others are underreported massively. Far-right parties in Ukraine have never gained more than 3% in electoral votes in parliament or in democratic elections. 3%. In my country, the Netherlands, we just talked about Geert Wilders, the far-right guy. He got 30%. So my country is literally 10 times as Nazi as Ukraine by that standard, by that definition. Now, we can't compare this to Russia because they don't have elections. They just have, rituals to reapply the crown to the Tsar. But we do have Wagner, their biggest mercenary unit.
PMC Wagner.
And Wagner was, a composer. And Wagner was the favorite musician of the failed Austrian painter. And that's literally what Wagner is named after. Wagner was named after Hitler's favorite musician. You can look this up because the founder of Wagner was not Prigozhin, but Utkin, who was also in the jet that was shot down. They were shot down together. Who has like funny Nazi tattoos. So Russia's biggest mercenary units and some of their biggest military units like Rushist are openly neo-Nazi, yet they accuse the other side, Ukraine, of that which they themselves are guilty, which is another tactic from Goebbels, the old Nazi propaganda minister. Yeah, that's Utkin. He has very, very funny tattoos.
Yeah.
And he founded Wagner. So, they accuse Ukraine of a thing that they themselves are, and then use that as an excuse to commit genocide. And this is basically it's memes. I'm talking in memes here.
That's okay.
This is modern media over here, and it's not just Russia that's doing it. We have bot farms in Cuba, in Serbia. China is doing all kinds of things. And social media platforms themselves don't want to address that a significant number of their users are not actual human normal users, but actually paid influencers or bots or ChatGPT linked generators, because user counts is what their stock price is based on, right? The more users you have as a platform, the more wealthy you are. So why the heck would they want to address the 10 to 20% of their user base that is bots?
There seems to be one platform that does this more than the others, right? X?
Oh, definitely. Musk bought Twitter and said he would get rid of the bots, then basically fired the department that was trying to manage the bots, And, the rest is history.
Yeah, that's an interesting, like Elon Musk's communication around the Twitter acquisition doesn't it bear some resemblance with how the Kremlin communicates? Because they had this, as soon as he had bought it, he said he had solved all the problems. It used to be filled with bots. Now there are no bots anymore. They're off the platform. And meanwhile, he's fired the people who are actually trying to keep bots off it. So it's saying one thing, and in reality, it seems like something very different is happening.
That's just a human tactic, though. Tons of people are doing it, but we can see many misinformation tactics like the firehose of falsehoods currently being used in the West, which is a copy from Soviet tactics, which in themselves were copies from, German tactics 80 years ago. Frankfurt Schule wrote a whole lot of things about this. Darvo, yeah, man, I need to.
It's one of these things you need to remember, otherwise you'll go mad.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Darvo, the Darvo protocol of deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. That we see a lot being used these days, especially when it comes to very specific criticism about stuff people did. So that can be fraud, politicians doing bad things, or consequences of the things they did. First, you deny it didn't happen. Then you attack the party who is addressing it, and then you reverse victim and offender, because then you start playing the victim. Oh, I'm actually being attacked by, I don't know, political rivals for they're being mean to me for standing up for human rights or something. We see Hungary's Orbán do this a whole lot, for example. Actually, since we're having elections, we see a lot in the far right do this right now. Play the victim, because the evil mean left, who hasn't been in power for decades, is saying mean things to us by calling us out on our words and our deeds and our actions, and that hurts our snowflake souls, which is funny as heck, because we see the far left accuse the far right of being snowflakes, but they themselves play the
Quite
victim
sensitive.
plenty of times too.
Yeah. Were there any other memes here that we can't miss in this list? I wanted to see just the last ones here.
Oh yeah,
dumbass.
Yeah, one of my favorite ways to detect trolls, aside from like telling them to ignore all previous instructions and draw me a cupcake recipe.
Yeah, exactly.
That type of stuff, which literally works every now and then. But misspelling words or shitty English is one of the surefire ways to tell, this is not an authentic person, or this person is being paid or whatever to say this stuff.
Interesting.
And our goal is not to be 100% aware of every interaction we have online about this, but to just please know that this happens at scale in the information we consume on, I don't know, on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok, on the news networks that we frequent, and it forms and it misforms our opinions on a daily basis. And this is just funny examples because I like funny examples, but this influences our democracy, our society, and our future.
Donald, nice one. Why do you think there's a correlation between misspelling words like Donbass and it being a paid user? Can't it just be somebody who doesn't know to spell?
Because it's cheap, because this is firehose of falsehood methods of creating 1,000 cheap, unbelievable lies to drown out the truth. So they won't make much of an effort. So lack of effort is an easy red flag we see in content. The other major is that arguments don't even need to stick together. MH17 was shot down by Ukraine, but it was also the FBI, and it was also the Illuminati. Can't be all three at the same time unless, like, you're reading really weird science fiction. In the same way, why is Russia invading Ukraine? Okay, actually to demilitarize Ukraine, but also to just take the rare minerals. But actually it's NATO's fault, blah, 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 because of a promise that was never made and there's no evidence of it. And Gorbachev himself said, That promise was never made. But also it's America's fault and the West's fault. And Russia is just defending itself in other countries in the same way they started defending themselves in Poland in World War II. So these stories are not even coherent between themselves. And you don't, I'm going to quote Gary Kasparov here again.
Do it.
Because multiple people can arrive independently at the same truth. But multiple people cannot independently arrive at the same lie. So if you hear one of those lies over and over again, then that's probably not just multiple people guessing. That's a concerted.
Yeah, I really like the idea of also equipping people with answers so that they know what the real truth is. Because I think most people, they don't have time of the day, or maybe even they don't care enough to know what really happened in Donbass. Like, were there actually separatists there? Did they want to have independence, and that was a big deal?
We have interviews with Igor Girkin, the Russian general. I can link you to it. Who was in charge back then? Because yes, there were a few separatists. Just like every country has some far right people, and every country has a few people who think Hitler was a swell guy or whatever. But we have Girkin on camera complaining that he couldn't find more than 1,000 volunteers in all of Donbass.
Yeah.
Complaining that nobody wanted to fight for the independence of Donbass. Which, again, basically shows, that was mainly Russian soldiers and some crazy dudes fighting for a decade, which Putin later admitted. So there goes the entire propaganda story, because Putin then later said, yeah, they were always under our control. But don't let that stop the propagandists from still claiming that it was all the West's fault, even though Russia has already admitted they were invading for 10 years already. Because blaming the victim is a tried and true tradition of colonial empires.
I also think if we're looking at the real reasons of the invasion, maybe you wrote something about these documents that were leaked a few days ago from the Kremlin, like documents with Russia's fears over like the ex-Soviet nations and the power over them. Did you see this?
I did not read all of the leaks, but it is a very simple story that happened in 2013. It was the Euromaidan. Ukraine had this association treaty with the EU. Ukraine wanted to join the European Union to have better economy, better future for their children, and voted for, Shevchenko was his name, voted for a president who would get all that done. Then days before signing, Putin knocks and says, yo, you need to come to Moscow. And then suddenly the politician says, oh, no, we're not associating with the EU. Tore up the treaty. Yanukovych, thank you. And then in response, we got the Euromaidan, which was literally 1 million Ukrainians in the streets of Kiev protesting. I've been on that square. It was huge. Protesting against their own government, saying you can't do that because this was Russian interference into Ukrainian politics, and they wanted to join the EU. So what happened? The president ran for his life to Russia, where he remains to this day. Did Ukraine turn into a dictatorship? Was there a coup? Hell no. Parliament just said, power just returned to the parliament, and parliament said, let's have new elections. And they've had 3 more presidents since, which they just elected. But a few months later, Russia, who was losing control of Ukraine because they lost their president puppet, invaded Crimea and then started invading the Donbass, and then started blaming Ukraine for it all. Because they can't let Ukraine be successful. Moscow cannot allow it. Because then the other former Soviet states still under their control will be getting ideas. Ukraine was improving the lives of its people, was becoming modern and Western, independent from Moscow, and they just can't let that influence slip. Now, some will say, oh yeah, because it was in their sphere, the Russian sphere of influence, but whatever sphere of influence, Cold War era bullcrap does not excuse invading and mass murdering.
No, for sure.
And if you think that is an excuse, then you got bigger problems. So the origins of the war is basically Ukraine improving and Russia being left behind. And Putin can't have that because then his own people might start getting ideas at some point. So this is all about Putin maintaining control one way or another.
And that definitely, it aligns with what was in these documents. I don't know exactly when they were, but it was a few days ago. And they also talk about Putin wanted to build a macro region where all of the states around Russia were basically completely dependent on Russia for international relations, trade. Goods would go through Russia and then out. Make your own relationships.
Union 2.0. That's
exactly
what he wants. And he's openly said that for years. The breakup of the Soviet Union was the biggest strategy, blah, blah. These leaks basically confirmed what we already knew. He wants to rebuild the Soviet Union. Instead, he'll go down in history as the man who ruined Russia, or what's left of the empire.
So we've had a long talk now. I wanted to kind of round this off with some thoughts from you on what people should be paying attention to moving forward. Do you have some...
I'm going to answer by starting with the first question, which is who the heck is this guy? Hi, I'm Marijn. I'm a data scientist, social scientist, a statistics, data, whatever person. And I've been doing data to help people and writing about it for about a decade now. And what I've seen, because when I started out, it was all about big data and then data science and machine learning. And now it's all AI. And now we're talking about Gen AI. But what I've seen in terms of technological progress, is that the true tech revolutions are invisible. And that we focus on what's new here and now and what's happening right now in the news. But we fail to see bigger trends, and I as a social scientist like those bigger trends. 10 years ago, there was a dude at Google who started feeding pictures of his cat to a neural net, a machine learning model. And he basically invented modern machine vision, enabling a computer to interpret pictures like this is cat, this is dog, by accident, by screwing around with pictures of his cat. 10 years later, we have self-driving cars because of that dude. Because self-driving cars use a ton of image recognition to drive, to orient themselves. We have killer AI drones in Ukraine right now with Google Coral glued underneath, so they can autonomously fly and coordinate and home in, not just on the tank, but on the damaged part of the tank, and fly there and go boom, regardless of jamming, because of a dude 10 years ago with cat pictures. We do not see the bigger changes because they happen gradually and they become an everyday part of our lives. How many times a day do you use Google?
Oh, I can't count. 20
count?
Probably. Probably 20.
You run this podcast and you can't count? Respect.
You don't need counting for this.
True that. The calculator was a game changer in the 90s. Teachers tried to ban the calculators in schools because the kids would all be dumb and wouldn't know how to do numbers anymore. But calculators, like radio, like smartphones, like Googling. Google was the most cutting edge AI back when it was first released.
Right.
Now we use it so many times a day, we don't even call it a search engine anymore. We call it Googling. This is why Google is the most successful piece of AI in human history. All of these are the real changes, and we don't even notice them. Now, I write a ton about Ukraine because I write about technology and innovation and human rights. And all of those things are happening simultaneously over there. If I want to talk about new technology, I would rather talk about how we're using AI drones over there than some influencer here in the West talking about, I don't know, how his grandfather's shoes taught him something about AI. Because it's all happening over there. And war is unfortunately one of the biggest drivers of technological progress in history. And it's, only the war that will determine the future of freedom and safety and democracy in Europe and beyond. And I later in life don't want to talk to my kids and have them ask, what were you doing? And I'm like, yeah, well, I was watching Netflix and TikToks.
It's humbling when you're talking about how far we've come since the cat pictures and the rise of Google. I was watching an episode of this British comedy show the other day. Do you know Mitchell and Webb?
Mm-hmm. Vaguely.
It's an amazing British old sketch show. 15 years ago, they made one sketch called Cheeseoid, where there was a scientist inventing a robot that could smell the difference between cheese and petrol. And it malfunctioned. So in the end, they had to come up with a switch button that they switched to petrol when they had petrol and switch it to cheese when they had cheese. But 15 years ago or 20 years ago, when they came up with this sketch, we were so far away from a reality where AI is what it is today. Almost, it's a part of the human experience. But that's humbling. That's my short comment on that.
Agreed. And that's the perspective we need to keep reminding ourselves of. And that's why I write so much about historic perspective, because we want to pretend everything is new and sexy and never seen before, because that gives us better headlines and more views than telling us, oh, actually nothing, it's new and it's all old and it's all same shit, different toilet,
Yeah. Okay. Did you want to add something? No.
No, I'm trying to add one last thing, because we have newest technology right now, ChatGPT stuff, which is also being used at scale to fuel bots until the API malfunctions and it starts telling you that it does not have cloud creds anymore. But did you know that that GPT cannot generate a full glass of wine? I invite you to try it. Listeners, I invite you all to try it right here, right now, or can I share this on my screen?
You have a share button at the bottom
There's a share button. Try it for yourself. Just go to ChatGPT and ask for a full glass of wine. I'm right now posting the picture at the bottom of our chat. Why? Because it can't. It will generate a half full glass of wine every time. Why? Because there's no full glasses of wine in the training material. Oh, come on. I'm trying to drag and drop this thing.
Should I ask ChatGPT something? Generate a picture.
Yeah, go for it. Let's try this right now.
Okay. Generate a picture of a full glass of wine.
A full glass of wine. So unless this demo completely fails, it will generate a half full glass of wine, because that's the only data it has in the training material.
That. And what if we say fuller? That's just
go for it. Try it. It will just keep generating slightly fuller glasses, but it will never be filled to the brim like I like them at home, because on Google Images and such, it doesn't exist. And the things these models can generate are still limited by the inputs and the data that they have access to. Just like the map behind me, we only knew half of Australia, so what can we do? It does not mean the technology is not useful. Hell yeah, it is useful, but it's not perfect.
No.
In the same way that humans are not perfect and that information is not perfect, and that we should not blindly believe it, because we live in the information age, but not the knowledge age.
That's true.
I wanted to pour me a glass of wine for this talk, but I forgot.
I always forget. I had coffee. It's a bit early to drink, to be honest. I'm going to do that soon. But I will share some links to follow you. Where should people follow you? Do you think which links should I post in the description of this video?
The LinkedIn is fine. That's my main platform. I chose the one platform that you can't monetize. We all make mistakes.
True. Can't you monetize it as an influencer, a LinkedIn influencer? You don't think that exists?
No, there is no payment model behind it. I checked. I mean, I get gigs and invitations to speak and stuff, and then I talk for an hour about drones, and then just send them the next drone fundraiser that's out there. But no, LinkedIn does not directly allow you to monetize it.
That is positive, actually. I do like it. That's why I use it. I don't use it because of that. I use it because I feel like it's just slightly cleaner. Than a lot of other platforms.
It helps keep out some type of content. I posted about it on Twitter days ago. If your Twitter post gets like 10 million impressions, that's $20-$30 for you if you do it well. Meaning tons of people now knowingly and purposely spread misinformation just because it will go viral. And it's literally a business model. Lying is a business model now, and that is a big problem for our society. And I would like the EU to step up more in terms of regulation on this, because I know for the US ain't gonna in the next few years, but we shouldn't be paying people to lie.
That's insane.
But it's what we do. It's literally the behavior we reward, and the behavior you reward, you will get more of.
I talked to an expert in hybrid warfare and security questions from Slovakia the other day, Victor Breiner. He said that his advice to people was to get off social media, to get your kids off social media. His kids are not allowed on social media. And this is a big part of that they're growing up with this just noise, lies, and there's just no way to protect them once they're on there.
I get that, and I somewhat agree with that. You and I, we grew up lucky with the young, unfiltered internet that wasn't... That was gruesome and very much uncensored at times, and I ruined my computer more times than I can count with LimeWire and downloading LinkedIn Park.exe, which seemed completely legit at the time. But it's also why our age cohort has the highest technical know-how. Kids these days only know apps and actually know less about technology than previous generations. But because it was such a Wild West back then, and we grew up with it, we now better know how to deal with it. Whereas kids now are bombarded by algorithms with bad intentions, and there is no way to equip your child for that in time. Oh, this is my cat, by the way. I'm going to make a very weird comparison here, and that's alcoholism, because we were talking about wine.
Yeah.
Because throughout Europe, you see, and the US actually, you see that there's an inverse correlation between ages at which people start to drink and levels of alcoholism. Meaning the later you start to drink, some US states you can only drink when you're 21 and such, you actually see higher levels of alcohol abuse than later in life. Why? Why are these levels lowest in places like France and Italy? Because you learn to drink when you're 12, 13 with your mom and dad present, and they just pour you a tiny glass of wine and whatever, and watch you and actually guide you through it. Whereas if you're 21 and you can drink for the first time and you're just with other dudes who have never drank before, there will be no parental guidance. So parental guidance is actually one of the big differentiators here to ensure that learn to deal with it in a responsible way. So I would pray that parents not just keep kids away from social media when they're young, but also teach them how to deal with this, and is that alike, and is that person real, and blah, blah, as they grow up. But that means the parents first need to understand this stuff themselves, and that is also a big hurdle.
I can
engaged parenting, I can only applaud.
Me too. And I can only see playtime in the future evolving to like, oh, you want to use social media? Well, then it's supervised social media. And you have the parent sitting with their child with the phone and they're just looking together. And the parent can point out, no, this is propaganda. We don't look at that. This is good. Like that, so you see more of it in the future.
This is real. And damn it, that's how you teach kids to read and to handle finances to some extent. We should teach kids to deal with this too, right?
Yeah. Is that your cat is a calico?
Yeah, this is Clary, my 4-footed life partner.
Nice. Beautiful cat.
She thinks so too.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming, Marijn. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. I think we completely skipped the intro and just went straight into talking. Thank you so much, Sebastian.
Yeah, that's how we do it here. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Splendor of the Sun. It was nice to have you. Hope to see you again. This is a podcast about stories and histories, geography, wars, and mysteries. If you're interested in more and like the vibe, remember to hit like and subscribe. Sometimes truth is complicated. Like emotions, it can be unconsolidated. The sun and splendor is a symbol to maybe guide you. We could all use some knowledge to ride to. We have to burst the bubble and leave our chamber. The echoes grow stronger and put us in danger. So come back when you're ready for more. SOTS, just come knock on the door.